So I want to pause right here and bring up four considerations that make it most likely that these...
I'm going to pause you right there. Textual variances are for cowards.
All right, let's see it.
God said he's going to preserve his word.
So we've already run into two big problems. That's nowhere in the Bible, and just because it's in the Bible doesn't mean God said it. Those are both just presuppositions that are asserted without argument, but aren't actually supported by any data whatsoever. Because if being in the Bible means that God said it, then that means God endorses slavery, God endorses the killing of certain babies, God thinks that the sexual abuse of women is an appropriate punishment for infidelity, and a lot of other things that you will ultimately try to wriggle out of. But the bigger problem is that God never says that. There are references to God's word never failing and lasting forever, but that has absolutely nothing to do with the biblical text. That is about the things God says never failing, never being proven false. In other words, what God says will come to pass and will be true, which has nothing to do with the textual preservation of anything, but has to do with the faithfulness of God's words. But again, if we go back to the fact that part of God's word includes endorsing slavery, endorsing the sexual abuse of women as a punishment for infidelity, endorsing the killing of certain babies, those are all things that obviously have failed because, well, they're not God's words. They're just the words of people who are pretending to speak on behalf of God. And now that's what you're trying to do.
So either he did or he didn't.
Or option three, you're just misunderstanding and misrepresenting the Bible for rhetorical effect. And spoiler, it's option three.
If he preserved his word, was it in the manuscripts or in the English language, like the KJV cult people? I tend to believe that he preserved it in the original language. So textual variances are for cowards that reject the Bible.
So not only does that conclusion not remotely follow from that fallacious and rickety house of cards you just clumsily put together, but I tend to believe is not an argument.
There's over 350,000 different textual variances that are documented.
So let's see if you have even a rudimentary understanding of these claims that you're asserting. Over 350,000 variants between what? Specifically, between what? And before we move on, I want to point out that yesterday I made a video where I pointed out that people who claim that the Bible hasn't been changed, once you demonstrate that the Bible has been changed in a lot of ways, the goalposts always and inevitably move to a different claim. Let's see what I said that claim would be. And that is a very different text from the King James Version. Now, inevitably, the goalposts are going to be moved to the claim that, well, none of the differences affect doctrine. Now let's move on in your video.
Do you know how many affect the Christian faith? A big goose egg. That's zero for the uneducated people.
And as I pointed out in my video yesterday, not only is that not true because it significantly complicates attempts to assert the doctrine of inerrancy, but it's also meaningless because the Christian faith and Christian doctrine do not flow downstream from the Bible. They are the product of a process of negotiation between a group's social and historical circumstances and their exigencies and their goals for the future and the text, where the text is not primary. The text is just the authority. And so doctrine can change while the text doesn't change. And the text can change while doctrine doesn't change. We could go back to slavery as an example of doctrine changing while the text remains the same. So again, this is all meaningless.
You know how many of those textual variances affect non-Christians? Pretty much all of them.
And how, pray tell, do you imagine that textual variants affect folks who don't accept the authority or inspiration or inerrancy of the Bible?
So either the Christian faith that Jesus is God is true, and God preserved his word.
So neither of those dogmas are actually in the Bible. Those are the outcomes of that process of negotiation between a socially and historically situated group with specific needs and exigencies and rhetorical goals, and the Bible, with the Bible mainly just functioning as the authority.
Or we're all like in really big trouble.
So there's the inevitable retreat to the sophomoric false dilemma that demonstrates that this content creator is both unwilling and unable to engage with the data in all their complexity, and would rather just gin up this rickety and fallacious rhetorical snare that isn't designed to convince anybody of what's most likely, but is just intended to try to compel people to side with the dogma by suggesting that the alternative is that we're all in really big trouble, which doesn't really do much more than just reveal the jejune nature of this particular content creator's grasp of these issues. Because what a lot of apologists are doing is demonstrating what helps them temporarily allay their own cognitive dissonance. And so for this content creator, they are showing that they are able to stuff down the cognitive dissonance by imagining that the alternative is that we're all in really big trouble, and that makes them feel better about siding without argument and without understanding with the dogma. And that's a really big problem. And the fit for this video, Ben, this was the 80s, man.